Say what you want about this beautiful chaos that we call the Tea Party movement. At least it's an ethos. And I channel the Big Lebowski for a reason here, because the Tea Party at some point started to be referenced as a political party. The press took the phrase Tea Party movement and turned it into capital T, capital P, and started comparing it to a political party. But the Tea Party is not a political party. The Tea Party is better than a political party because it's based on an ethos. It's based on a set of ideas. And ideas don't change. Political parties change all the time. Ideas don't go away. Ideas work if they're good ideas. And that makes the Tea Party movement far more important than a political movement. It's going from this small sliver of Americans that pay attention to politics to a much broader cultural space where Americans live. And that's why we're so excited about this opportunity we see today, because it's really the ideas that Cato has talked about, and the founders talked about, and Hayek talked about, and everyone that believes in freedom translated into pop culture. And you saw it with, when Glenn Beck holds up Hayek's book, and all of a sudden everybody's reading Hayek. By the way, they were reading Hayek long before Glenn Beck held up the book. And they're reading Ayn Rand, and I like to say it this way: the Tea Party movement has been fueled by the decentralization of knowledge online that allows us to do an end run right around the Republican Party and the Democratic Party and the 3 national TV networks. So we don't have to listen to Michael Steele for our information. We don't have to listen to Dan Rather for our information. We're going right around them and getting that knowledge from multiple sources all on our own. And that's exactly what's going on in the Tea Party movement. Some people suggest that these folks are illiterate rubes that haven't read anything. I remember last September 12th finally wading through the hundreds of thousands of people that had gathered on the Capitol steps at the March on Washington, and one lady had draped a sign right over the front of the security barrier. It was as big as she was. It was probably 6 feet tall, and it said, "Read Thomas Sowell." Doesn't seem inarticulate or ill-read to me. And this is what's driving the left nuts, because nobody's in charge of this thing, and everybody is getting the information for themselves, whether they're reading the healthcare for themselves. And you literally had thousands of activists and bloggers slicing and dicing the healthcare bill within minutes of it being posted online. And you have this beautiful, competitive, spontaneous order that is pulling these bits of knowledge and posting them online and feeding this movement and getting them information in real time. And this is a new phenomenon. It's very different than anything we've seen in our lifetime. And some of you will recognize this process as very much what Hayek talked about when he described the spontaneous order of the market process. He talked about the personal knowledge of time and place and how everybody in their spot in society, in their communities, had knowledge that nobody else had. And somehow, through the miracle of cooperation and the price system, things happened. Buyers found sellers. People cooperated. Society got wealthier. Well, that same process very much describes the origins of the Tea Party movement. We went from, and we document this in the book, we went from a few lonely activists getting up off of their couches, and I think this was in response more to Republican malfeasance than anything President Obama did, getting off their couches and saying, we got to do something, and not knowing what to do, but going out and doing it anyway. And the first protest we can document was Mary Rakovich in Fort Myers, Florida, where she showed up outside of a rally that President Obama was having with then-Republican Charlie Crist, celebrating the $1 trillion in money we didn't have that was going to stimulate the American economy. And that, by the way, is the now infamous hug between Charlie Crist and Barack Obama that became such a powerful campaign image when he lost the Republican primary for the Senate seat. Mary Rakovich was excited to see that about a dozen other people showed up. But within a couple days, she held another event, and hundreds of people showed up. And Kelly Carrender in Seattle, a young school teacher, wanted to do something and was shocked when hundreds of people showed up in Seattle protesting big government. And then Rick Santelli came along. And what Rick Santelli did, I think it was completely inadvertent, is that he connected people back to an American tradition that maybe a lot of us had forgotten. Maybe not the people in this room, but the idea that America was founded not just on the radical principles of individual freedom, but on the radical principle that the people could be trusted to govern themselves. Thomas Jefferson was a radical Democrat. Santelli reminded people of that, and people started going back and looking at the Boston Tea Party. What was that all about? We happened to be studying the Boston Tea Party years ago at our organization because I actually found it on a website for a radical leftist group called the Ruckus Society. And the Ruckus Society is the worst of the worst. They spike trees. They promote all sorts of not just bad ideas, but bad behavior amongst the radical left. And when you went to their grassroots training manual, they call it direct action. What was their model for social change? It was the Boston Tea Party. And at the time, we said, when did we lose our own tradition? And don't you think we should steal it back from the left? And that's exactly what the Tea Party movement has done. And we talk about, you know, this tradition that started with Sam Adams recruiting people on the docks of Boston in the 1750s and the 1760s. And these weren't the intellectual elite. These were the people in colonial America that felt that freedom was worth fighting for. And this was not a spontaneous uprising against government power and crony capitalism and all the things that we know philosophically fueled the Tea Party. It was a conscious effort by grassroots activists to demonstrate to the rest of colonial America that freedom was worth fighting for, that independence was worth fighting for. And it really does, and I believe this, that we're reminded in the history of our own founding that there was what Leader Armey calls an inside-outside game. We had the intellectual entrepreneurs inside the Continental Congress. We've all read them, we all know them, we all understand their genius. But we also had this grassroots cadre, they called themselves the Sons of Liberty, that were outside the Continental Congress. They were on the docks of Boston. They were on that ship and dumped tea into the water. And without that pressure from the outside, the geniuses that wrote the Declaration and the Constitution never would have succeeded. And that's part of the American tradition, and that was part of the mandate from the founders, that the people stay involved. I call it eternal vigilance. Thomas Jefferson says that the people are the only sure reliance in the defense of our liberty. George Washington said, and I never get this quote right, so I tried to write it down, the preservation of the sacred fire of liberty and the fate of the Republican form of government is staked firmly and perhaps finally in the experiment entrusted on the American people. I think what he's saying there is that this whole thing isn't going to work unless the people stay involved. Today, I think that the Tea Party movement is a rebirth, if you will, of the mandate from the founders that a constitutionally limited government will not work unless people stay vigilant, stay on their elected officials, and insist that they not only say the right thing, but do the right thing. And that makes this movement more than a political movement. There's going to be a lot of election results, and we describe this in the book, that the Tea Party movement, first and foremost, from a political standpoint, is in fact a hostile takeover of the Republican Party. And that got a lot of press, and we mean that as economists. And there's a very technical meaning of the word hostile takeover, but what you're seeing again and again in election after election is tax and spend Republicans being replaced with people that believe that the Constitution limits the size of government, believe that you shouldn't spend money you have, believe that governments don't run car companies or healthcare systems very well. And it's been quite dramatic, and I think that's going to have a real impact on the makeup of the next Congress, whether it be controlled by Republicans or Democrats.